Unfuck the Poor Intermission. If you've listened to all the episodes in this podcast up to now, congratulations, you just got your first lesson in economics. Do you remember how when we met all the players in the last chapters, there were no economists? There were hedge fund managers, bank regulators, community activists, and billionaires making brief cameos, but not a single one of them was an economist. Do you remember how at times I would go into granular detail about very specific things, like that time the REO contractor was confused about what the hell he was going to do with that generator? And then the other times when I explained larger, more complex things like redlining. And do you remember how I only showed you one actual graph and used no math? Well, good. We technically just had a very comprehensive lesson in macroeconomics and microeconomics. Macroeconomics looks at how the entire economic system works. It's big picture. Microeconomics studies the economic behavior of individuals. It's like a little snapshot. They are two different words, as if they are two separate things, but they are not. Because Otting's personal feelings affected his professional actions as a bank regulator, the bitterness of one man had massive repercussions on literally millions of people, low and moderate income earners. No matter how far away from a thing you get, derivatives, futures, options, instruments, contracts, Air Force Ones, or redlining, it all goes right back to where it started. You simply can't divorce the outcomes from individual actions, no matter how much time or distance you put between the outcome and the inciting event. A fuck-up will, whatever they have fucked up, always be responsible for their fuck-up. For example, remember when I was telling you about how the FDIC reimbursed One West through a P&A agreement? Did you know that there's a whole-ass formula for the justification of the P&A agreement as the most preferred method of intervention for most of the FDIC's history? You can view the formula at askaleftist.com. It's simply a mathematical rationale for the historic fucking up of bank failure, and the formula listed on the website is actually just part of a dissertation that is 76 pages long, and I have no idea what the fuck any of it means. What I do know is that because the P&A agreement is the most used intervention method in the FDIC's history, people probably know that in the event of a huge-ass bank collapse like IndyMac, swooping in and purchasing and assuming its assets and debts will have a huge payday if the outstanding loans default, and you would definitely want that payday, so you might be inclined to just crank out defaults. So while that formula is very smart and definitely validates the reason for the FDIC's preferred use of P&A agreements, it sure as fuck doesn't predict anything other than the FDIC will probably continue using the P&A agreement. Now, that is important, but I could also have told you all of this based on what we know about the One West situation, and that is they made a fuck ton of money, realized that the CRA was trying to prevent them from making a fuck ton of money, so they gutted the CRA, and now they can make more money, and the FDIC will go ahead with reimbursements because fuck it, they can't let the banks fail. I'm not going to rehash all of that. I feel like we just got over it, but I do want to point out that my initial assertion that economists cannot predict future behavior based on an analysis of past behavior is only slightly off. A thinking person would say, well, if the P&A is the best deal for the FDIC, they will take it every time. But we've also seen that the P&A agreement was not really the best deal for someone very important, someone left out of the equation entirely. The equation only involves the bank and the regulator. And that is the people living in the low and moderate income neighborhoods whose loans are about to be serviced by the preferred buyer of assets. They are not included because what decision did they have to make? They already made it and they signed a piece of paper to prove it. They are not part of the equation. Perhaps most telling in this dissertation is the repeated use of the terms hypothetical and assume, which reduce the risk of error in the formula. By constricting the boundaries of a mathematical model, you guarantee the outcome you're seeking. Not that the author of the dissertation is looking for P&A to be the FDIC's preferred scheme, but in solely examining how the FDIC and the bank interact, the outcome only shows the method most beneficial to both parties. If you include the interests of a third party, those being serviced by the acquisition, then the formula becomes muddied. Do you separate individual and business accounts? Do you separate low and moderate income customers from middle and high income customers? The easiest solution is to assume a certain set of hypothetical parameters and restrict your model to two parties. If economists were actually in charge, would the outcomes be any different? Would they spend much of their time weighing the outcomes of their decisions based on models? Or would their position of power require faster thinking and allow less time for formulas? We can certainly guess. For those readers who got jobs in their field of study, what is that job like compared to how you studied it? Do you refer to your textbooks, or do you just respond to what's put in front of you? Do you learn your profession better through experience, or does your education give you valuable insight into how to perform better? And this brings us to the fundamental problem first encountered in the opinion article that we started out with, the one published in Nature. Because economics is a social science, sometimes the models disagree with our instincts, and because we can input our own experience, we can often disagree with what the models tell us. After all, we have real experience, and therefore we must know just as much, if not more, than the professionals who make models of our behavior. This is, of course, not entirely true. We can learn a lot about behavior from models. Think of it as studying the path of least resistance. But what to say of the models themselves if the perfectly rational, economical human is to be assumed because they make the best predictors of behavior? Then what's to say we haven't been groomed as a society to be predictable? And that brings us to the next chapter.